You've seen Stonehenge 100 times, on postcards, in documentaries, in every list of ancient wonders ever made. You probably assume the people who built it simply became the people who lived there afterward, generation after generation, all the way down to modern Britain. It's a reasonable assumption. It's also almost entirely wrong. The real answer is far stranger. The people who built Stonehenge didn't gradually become the British. Within a few centuries of finishing it, they were almost completely replaced. Think about what that sentence actually means. Not conquered in a single famous battle, not wiped out in some recorded catastrophe, replaced so thoroughly that if you tested the DNA of people living in Britain a few hundred years after Stonehenge was completed, you'd find that around 90% of their ancestry traced back to somewhere else entirely. And almost nobody talks about this because for most of history, nobody could have known. To understand how we know it now, you have to understand what changed in archaeology roughly a decade ago. For centuries, archaeologists could only study what people left behind: pottery styles, burial customs, tools, building methods. When one set of pottery styles replaced another in the archaeological record, there was a long-running debate about what that actually meant. Did new people arrive, or did the same people simply adopt new fashions from neighbors they traded with? For most of the 20th century, the field leaned heavily toward the second explanation. Ideas travel, people mostly stay put. That was the consensus. Then ancient DNA sequencing arrived, and it turned out you could ask the bones directly. Geneticist David Reich, whose lab at Harvard has sequenced ancient genomes from thousands of individuals across Europe, published findings that reshaped the entire debate. By extracting DNA from skeletal remains, particularly from the dense petrous bone in the inner ear, which preserves genetic material far better than other parts of the body, his team could compare the ancestry of populations living in the same place at different times. What they found in Britain was startling. The Neolithic farmers who built Stonehenge, themselves descended from earlier migrants who had come from Anatolia, were followed within a few hundred years by a population with overwhelmingly different ancestry, associated with what archaeologists call the beaker culture, named for their distinctive bell-shaped pottery. This wasn't a subtle shift. Analysis suggested the genetic turnover in Britain during this period was around 90%. Ask yourself what that would actually look like on the ground. Not necessarily an invasion in the way you're picturing. Population replacement on this scale can happen through many overlapping mechanisms, and archaeologists are still debating which mattered most. Incoming groups may have carried diseases the existing population had no resistance to. They may have arrived with different agricultural techniques, metalworking knowledge, or social organization that gave them a demographic advantage over generations. Climate shifts may have already stressed the existing population before newcomers arrived. Some conflict almost certainly occurred. But the crucial point is that the archaeological record alone could never have told you this happened at all. Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson, who has spent decades excavating Stonehenge and its surrounding landscape, has emphasized how much labor and social coordination the monument represents. The largest stones, the sarsens, weigh up to 25 tons and were transported roughly 15 miles. The smaller bluestones came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 140 miles away. Building this required sustained organization across generations, food surplus, planning, shared belief, an enormous cooperative effort. And within a relatively short window afterward, the descendants of the people who accomplished all of that made up a small fraction of the population living around it. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Stonehenge itself didn't stop being used. The beaker people and their descendants continued burying their dead nearby, adding to the landscape, incorporating the monument into their own practices. Archaeologist Ian Armitt, who has studied Bronze Age Britain extensively, has noted how frequently incoming populations across Europe adopted and reused existing monuments rather than destroying them. So the stones stayed. The meaning changed, the people changed almost entirely, and the monument simply kept standing there, being used by successive populations who had little genetic relationship to the ones who raised it. Now think about how invisible this would have been. If ancient DNA sequencing had never been developed, we would still be having academic arguments about whether beaker pottery represented migrating people or just a popular new style spreading through trade. The physical evidence was genuinely ambiguous. It took reading the genomes of the dead to reveal that an entire population had largely been succeeded by another, in a place we thought we understood well. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Population replacement of this magnitude left almost no obvious trace in the record we spent 2 centuries studying. No dramatic destruction layer, no written account because writing didn't exist there yet, just pottery changing style and a monument continuing to stand. Which raises an uncomfortable question about everywhere else. How many other places, cultures, and prehistoric populations across the world experienced something similar and left behind a record so quiet that we simply assumed continuity where there was almost none? So the next time you see Stonehenge on a postcard, remember what you're actually looking at. Not a monument passed peacefully down a single unbroken line to the people who live around it today. You're looking at something built by a population that largely vanished, inherited by newcomers who kept using it anyway, and standing quietly ever since, holding a piece of history so well hidden that we needed to read it directly from the bones to find out it had happened at all.